Okay, the next two we can handle in one video here. So salutary neglect and economic independence. Salutary neglect we covered in detail in the previous lecture, so I'm not going to go into salutary neglect too much. But suffice to say, the third condition which contributed to the American Revolution was experienced in self-government or salutary neglect from the years 1619 to 1776. All right. Self-government was not an American creation. That's the first thing we have to understand. It was an outgrowth of salutary neglect, as discussed in the previous lecture, and it was also an invaluable legacy of England itself. It wasn't just something that even the colonists created. So, as mentioned in previous lectures, in 1619, Jamestown received instructions from the Virginia Company to establish the first representative assembly in English America, the House of Burgesses. This example of self-government in the first English colony in America is an outstanding representation of the impact of the political developments within England during the 16th century and their direct relationship to the English colonies. It would have been unthinkable for the Spanish kings in the 1500s to have permitted this degree of self-government within the Spanish settlements. When the Spanish colonials moved tentatively in the direction of limited government in the 1530s, the Spanish sovereign Charles I banned representative bodies in the New World. So in contrast, the concept of limited power of the monarch was widely accepted in England, starting with the Magna Carta in 1215, as earlier discussed. So by the beginning of the 17th century, this idea of basic rights and limited government was the product of the English mind and experience, which transmitted to the English colonies in the form of self-government. The Magna Carta became a blueprint for social and legal justice and established such ideas that no man could be judged without a trial by his peers, and that his life or his property could not be taken away without trial. So these basic enlightened ideals that are going to have a huge influence within the American Revolution. It also established that no man or no king was above the law. Again, enlightened principles, first born out in the Magna Carta, made more sophisticated through the writings of John Locke, and then actualized in the American environment, in the colonial era of the American environment. So it was the combination of England's neglect, salutary neglect, and these basic rights as articulated with the Enlightenment, again, manifested through the American environment through the colonial era, which were developed on English soil and transplanted to the American, where they were allowed to germinate in a much freer environment. That led to the provincial governments, which developed under the leadership of popular leaders like Sam Adams, which we'll discuss in a later lecture, and Patrick Henry in the 1770s. So that's important to understand, that it's not all of a sudden people like Sam Adams or Thomas Jefferson or John Adams or Patrick Henry that are coming up with these lofty ideals that are going to foment revolution and independence. It's that this is a long culmination that has developed through the American environment, through enlightened ideals, to this phenomena of salutary neglect or self-government. So it's real important to understand that the American political independence was an evolutionary process that started with the House of Burgesses in 1619 and evolved through the intercolonial committees of correspondence to the Second Continental Congress of the 1770s. And this is an important point to keep in mind. So this is when we hear modern political leaders say we're going to bring democracy to other parts of the world. One thing we need to understand is that our democracy did not all of a sudden appear overnight through the workings of brilliant individuals, right? Certainly, there is a lot of credit to give to the founding fathers, but they were a product within a historical context that they had nothing to do with. They were just acting on on a historical context and taking advantage of that historical context to their own gain. To their own gain, they benefited from it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done it. So that's important to understand about this process and how, when you hear modern politicians say we are going to impose democracy on this region of the world, I mean that's certainly a worthy goal. We can all agree probably that all human beings on this planet should have to live in democratic institutions, that is, have some sort of say in the authority in which they are compelled to submit to. They should be able to vote for the people within those within the confines of power for those societies, and be able to vote them out, more importantly. But this is something that is not a universal, and again, it's something that developed in a very particular context within humanity and during a certain period of time. And the fourth factor, economic independence. So the fourth, this is what we basically covered when we were looking at mercantilism. Again, mercantilism is the process of, so mercantilism, again, just to give you a visual, raw products are produced here like tobacco or cotton, and then they are sent here to be turned into finished goods. And those finished goods are exported out into the world where they're consumed, one within the mother country itself, but also into for other consumers in different regions where that particular empire, in this case England, has reigned. So products are brought down here and also brought back here. The idea, again, is to create economic independence for England, so it doesn't have to rely on the economies of Spain or of the French or the Portuguese or whatnot. So to enforce mercantilism, you first had a series of acts described as the Navigation Acts of the 1600s. And basically all of these different acts stipulated is that if you're going to trade as a colonist, you have to trade with British ships, using British ships, right? And so it was an effort of England to control the process of trade. You also had in the 1700s, like with the Woodland Hat Act, kind of an advancement of the Navigation Acts, the Trade Acts, basically saying that if you can trade with other empires out there in the region, but you have to do it through English merchants. Now, what's important to understand about these laws is that, one, what they were there for. They were there to enforce the economy of mercantilism, but more importantly, they were largely ignored, right? And through the process of salutary neglect, what begins to become apparent to colonists by 1763, when England begins to enforce these laws like the Navigation Acts of the 1600s and the Trade Acts of the 1700s, and then impose new laws to establish its authority for the first time, really, it becomes clearer and clearer to the colonists, its popular leaders like Sam Adams and John Adams and George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, that they are already and have been economically independent, that they never really did need England in the first place, except through customs and laws and protection. That would be a big factor there. But this is important to know, because what the American Revolution, the actual war itself, is from the colonist perspective, as they're declaring their independence, is not a war to change a relationship. It is a war to preserve something that was already a fact, that they were already economically independent, that they did not need England, and they had not need England to be a viable society, right? If anything, if the party that was trying to change something was England itself, it was trying to subjugate its colonies into economic interdependence on England and political subjugation, right? This clearly had not been the case as it had evolved and developed since the early 1600s to the actual revolution. So for the next one, colonial unity, that's going to be the subject of the next video down below. So take a look at that one, and then we'll really flesh out colonial unity in the next couple of lectures, looking at Sam Adams, looking at the Declaration of Independence. So take a look at the next video. It lays the groundwork for colonial unity, and then we'll further expand that on future lectures.